Mike Clifford here, and today I'm going to show you how I collaborated with my friend Ariel to create this Concrete Agamograph. Now some of you might be art history buffs, and you might know what an agamograph is. I had no idea until about a month ago when Ariel came to me with the idea to work together to create one.
So an agamograph is a piece of optic art. It's named after the artist who invented it, whose name is Jacob Agam. And what optic art means is that when you view the piece of art from different angles, you see different pictures.
So when she came to me, the first thing that came to my mind was, why don't we make it out of concrete? Because I've never seen it done before. And then we got to talking about how we wanted to paint it, and the urban grittiness of the concrete just made sense to do with spray paint. And so that's what we created.
And now we'll show you how it's done.
We used melamine to make the form, and you can watch my other videos if you want to see more details on how to make that. We had to make a corrugated base here, which we'll get into more detail on later. This was Ariel's first time using a table saw, so I actually had to show her how to use it. And this was actually a ton of fun to get to share my love of making with somebody else.
Yeah, I had actually never used a table saw, never used a miter saw, never used any kind of saw at all, but it was a lot of fun. It was a blast, and obviously I had a great teacher, so that always helps.
Although not that great of a teacher, because I saw us wearing gloves on the table saw. Please, at home, don't do that. It actually is more dangerous than it is safe, because you can get threads caught in the saw and then really bad things happen. So you can see here that we actually laid out all these triangular pieces which were going to form a corrugated base for the form. After we did that, we cut the sides of the form, and then we applied paste wax to all the corrugated pieces before we put the form together, because it was easier to do at that point. While we're applying the wax to the form, I wanted to take a minute to remind you, if you like these videos, click that little button at the lower right to subscribe to the Industrial Maker channel and get notified about all my future build videos. So one thing we did different with this form was to use a piece of 1/4-inch fiberboard as a backer here instead of melamine. And this is really just to save money, because we were setting the corrugated triangular pieces across the bottom to form all the individual triangles for the agamograph. So there was no reason to use melamine for the bottom. We just used the same caulking trick with the cake fondant tool like I've shown in my past videos.
And I had never caulked before either, so that was fun as well.
She liked holding the big gun. Anyway, so back to the build. I actually want to rewind for a second and talk about something you saw us doing a minute ago. Instead of using screws to attach the form and cutting the base to the exact dimensions that we were molding the concrete to, we just laid a flat piece out and used a hot glue gun to attach the sides of the form. When you have shorter edges, this is really all that's necessary to hold them in place. After waiting for the caulk to dry, we just peeled it right off, which was easy to do because of the paste wax. So before we get into the concrete pour, I wanted to talk a little bit about the choice of concrete for this build. If you've seen my past videos, you know I love glass fiber reinforced concrete, but this time I actually just used a bag of Quikrete Q-Max concrete mix, which is really great. It's their highest strength out of the bag mix, and we did that because we actually wanted it to be a bit of a rougher and more textured surface to the concrete, instead of the sort of smooth modern look that you get with a GFRC mix. And Ariel, I think this was your first time ever mixing concrete, so how was that experience?
Well, I was honestly intimidated at first, but once we got into it, it was very, very easy. The actual making of the recipe was just like making pancakes, and then once we started mixing, it was like a mini workout. So I feel in shape now.
One other design choice that I want to mention here is the height of the edges of the form. We made them basically exactly the same height as the triangular pieces in the middle. And the reason that we did that was so that all the pieces would separate out and actually be individual pieces when we demolded, which is important, as you'll see, for the process of actually painting the concrete. So you'll see here the results of that design. Each of the triangles actually comes out of the form as a separate piece. To me, it kind of felt like I was making a big Toblerone bar.
And this was actually my favorite part of this whole project, the big reveal, seeing if these pieces of concrete actually came out how we wanted them and that they didn't break. And luckily, none of them did. And they came out really cool. They were gritty and had that urban street art kind of feel that we were going for. So everything worked out.
So this was one of the big tricks we figured out. We used the triangular pieces that made up the base of the form, and we actually glued two of them together and made a right triangle that was exactly the same size as a result as each of the right triangles that made up the Concrete Agamograph. We could then put those two together with double-sided tape to make a square. Those squares could then be stacked together on one side to form a solid rectangular piece on only one side of the triangle. This allowed us to paint that one side, take them apart, then use double-sided tape to put them together in the opposite way, and then paint the other side.
And being able to paint each side separately is one of the most important parts of making an agamograph, because an agamograph has multiple pictures. It has one picture from one side, one from the other side, and as you move around, that picture changes.
And one thing we had to figure out was how to put them together. We ended up using Gorilla Tape, which is super strong and did a great job for this. So then we set everything up for the spray paint. And I guess I'll mention that we are definitely no graffiti artists, although I think Ariel has a really good artistic eye, and she came up with the idea here for the painting.
Yeah, so I'd never used spray paint before, except when I was a teenager, I think. But I have made an agamograph before. Agam is actually a distant cousin of mine, so I've been inspired to make works that are similar to his for my whole life. I've made them with paint and other materials, but never used concrete, never used spray paint. So this was something new, but I think Mike and I worked together, we figured it out, and it came out pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's great about spray paint is you can always spray over it. If you notice at the very beginning, we actually had one design that we ended up changing, and the design that we ultimately came up with was to have sort of geometric lines that were inspired by Agam, who had lots of geometric shapes, and then combine that with the sort of drips that go with graffiti art. And then we actually had different paintings so that the top painting dripped in one direction. We flipped it over, the painting on the other side dripped the other direction, so that they ended up looking like they dripped together.
And the color scheme that we chose, this is hanging above my bed. So we chose colors that would match with my bedroom, and that's how we got what we worked with. Agam's works, if you Google his originals, they're a lot more bright colors, more, I guess, rainbow type colors, you could say. So we went with a different hue for this piece.
After waiting for the spray paint to dry on one side, we took the concrete pieces off of the base triangles, flipped them over, put painter's tape to mask off the parts that were already painted, and then repeated the process of making squares and putting them together with Gorilla Tape so that the other side of the painting could be completed.
I definitely had fun with the spray paint here, and I bought a bunch more and am playing around with it, trying to learn this technique now. So if you think that you might like to see more street art and graffiti elements incorporated in future builds, just leave a comment and let me know, and you'll probably see more of it.
The last thing to do was make the walnut backer piece and French cleat system. For this, we used a 1/2 inch sheet of walnut veneer plywood cut to size, and then applied a quick coat of polyacrylic to pop the grain a bit. On the back side, we made a frame from 4 scrap pieces of 3/4 inch plywood, since you wouldn't see these. And the top piece is angled at 45 degrees on the lower side to form a French cleat that we could use to hang it to the wall. This frame also creates a nice surface that will be hidden that we can attach an LED strip to provide backlighting for the work. Then it was time to attach the concrete pieces that made up the Agamograph to the walnut backer. To do this, I made sure they were perfectly straight with a level, and then used a product called Fuse It to attach them. I was pretty worried that they would attach well and how solid they'd be, but after using Fuse It, I had no worries at all. This worked great. We then attached the mating piece for the French cleat to the wall and made sure it was level. The last thing to do was to attach the LED strip to the frame in the back of the Agamograph. Now, this was a really fun, different project for me, and it was really fun to collaborate with a friend. A lot of times in making, you're kind of isolated on your own, so if you don't get your friends involved, I suggest trying it, make things for them, make things with them. It really adds a lot of fun to the project. And as always, if you like my builds, remember to click that subscribe button in the lower right. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.